Hi and good day everyone, my name is Alex Horst. I'm a product specialist for media and entertainment at Autodesk, and recently I had the joy and the pleasure to visit Black Forest Game Studios in Germany, who have created the platformer jump and run action game Giana Sisters, which has been published for PlayStation, Xbox and PC. So Black Forest Game Studios has been using 3ds Max as the core product for the asset creation, but we will also see the process of creating concept art with the sketchbook, as well as sculpting and texturing in our 3D application Mudbox. But before we jump into the process of content creation, let me give you some brief background information on Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams. So as I said earlier, it has been developed by Black Forest Games, and the title originated back in 1987 on Commodore 64, and the whole project has been successfully kickstarted on Kickstarter.com. And to give you an overview of what the game looks like, let me switch screens here. So I've booted up a version of Giana Sisters here, and let me just quickly load a level which we can play through. Well, not actually play through, but jump around and just give you an impression of what the game and the art style is about. And so here we go. There we go. So, well, Giana Sisters, the remake of Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams is basically, it's again a platformer and action arcade jump and run game, which enables you to transform in real time. And this is kind of the tricky part here. In real time between the punk version of Giana and the cute and nice version of that girl. And while we transform, it will also change the whole game mechanics, or part of the game mechanics, as well as the whole art style of the game. So as you see here, the trees in the background and in the foreground, they change between this cute version and the dark version. That's how they call it, Black Forest game people. In real time. This is what the game engine really does, and we'll have a look at how to create that kind of 3D assets and make it morphable in 3ds Max and later on in the game engine. But first of all, let's have a look at how to create concept art for that project. So a great tool to do your storyboarding and concept art is obviously Sketchbook Pro, which has just been released in version 2015. That's the version I've loaded up here. And this gives you a number of new functionalities and features, like all the 18 layer blend modes, which are compatible with Photoshop and Photoshop files. And you have layer grouping in here. It's way faster, the workflow is way more intuitive. You have a number of new tools available at your fingertips, like the perspective guidelines here, where you can choose between a 1-point and 2-point and 3-point perspective, and set that up on the fly and start painting your or drawing your 3D perspectives on your paper. So that's a very powerful workflow which is available right now. And I've taken down a note here. Scott Robertson has just released a 15-minute review and tutorial on how to use these perspective sketching tools. So this tutorial is available on YouTube too, if you just want to search for that. His name is Scott Robertson. So yeah, what you can do, you can use these perspective tools and match them up and combine them with a symmetric tool set in Sketchbook Pro, which also has been slightly boosted in Sketchbook Pro 2015. So this is very, very powerful. And then let me just create a new layer in a moment. So there we go. And I'm going to show you the another perspective mode, which is the fisheye lens. So very, very nice tool for drawing this kind of fisheye distortion. I've also recently talked to Ulrich Zeidler, who's a German concept artist who's been working on blockbusters like Grand Budapest Hotel, 300 Rise of an Empire, The Three Musketeers, and so on and so on. And he always jumps between Photoshop and Sketchbook Pro for doing his work, storyboarding and concept art. And whenever it comes down to handling multiple layers, like hundreds of layers, and whenever he needs to use his Wacom Companion or his laptop, he always prefers Sketchbook Pro because of its great performance when it comes down to handling this big amount of different layers and high resolution. So let me just quickly, unhide some of these different steps for concept art that the Black Forest Games people did here. On the left hand side we have the cute version, on the right hand side we have the dark version, the crypt, which literally is the morph target for the cute version of that housing. And they're using all these different layers to quickly iterate between different versions, as the 3D artists had to early on really see both versions of the object to have in mind which polygons and edge loops and additional extrusions he should generate early on in the cute version of the object in order to generate the morph target later on. And then again, this is a non-destructive workflow, having all these layers here, so changes could be made quite nicely, quite quickly. And you have all these different, I think, assets here in Sketchbook Pro are layer based as a Photoshop file, and this can be easily added into 3ds Max as a reference. So there are other examples here, and they also generated quick level designs in as a concept art in order to communicate these different game mechanics, as we can see here. So this is basically also something that can be done in Sketchbook Pro, obviously. All right, let's get back to this one. The next step in this process is to hop over into 3ds Max and see how we can translate these concept arts over into our 3D world, how to generate 3D assets and how to set up the morphing. In 3ds Max, right here, we have this, these very basic objects, just to make you familiar with the process of the morphing once more. What's crucial for that process, as you probably know, is that with morphing, you are not allowed to change the vertex IDs too much, and you're not allowed to change the vertex total, the total number of vertices in your object. Otherwise, it will greatly mess up that morphing, as we can see here. So what we want to do is basically create the same object out of the same topology, the same object twice, like the cute version and the dark version. So what I have here is this barrel, and I'm going to use the graphite modeling tools not to add in extrusions and loops, but to pick existing loops and shift those around. So I'm using the Swift Loop tool here. I'm control picking the whole loop, and then I'm going to use the Alt and left mouse button, Alt key and left mouse button, to shift over these existing loops from the mid to the top or the bottom of the barrel. And I'm just quickly going over into my faces here, and I'm moving that in. Just see that I'm not doing any extrusions. I'm not adding any geometry to that topology. I'm just using the existing topology here. So I'm growing and shrinking my selection just to be able to scale up and down and move existing vertices around. That's all I'm doing here. So back into my Swift Loop tool, let's do the middle part of that barrel, moving that up and down here. And just bear in mind that we have been using the Swift Loop tool and the Alt button to move around these existing loops along the alongside the existing topology and the barrel. All right, so let's hop out of that edit poly here. I'm using the X key to quickly filter my modifiers. I'm using the FFD modifier to to create the final shape of the barrel here. And we should be good to go. So let's give that a try. I'm adding that barrel we just created into my morpher. And there we go, morphing works. So never mind the texture for now. We're just setting up the morphing. I would be able to add progressive morphing. So morphing to the very left, to the mid, to the right. That's what we've set up here. Alright, so now that the morphing is being set up, the final step Black Forest Games did is adding a flex modifier on top in order to have this kind of cute bounce in, bounce out effect for that animation. And these are two modifiers because we're having a range for these flex modifiers here, one for the fade in and one for the fade out of that morph animation. So these are the very basics for setting up that morph event for that morph target. So a bit more complex here. What we have is a water mill transition into a windmill in the background. Also have the concept art to the left and the right as a reference. So Well, these morph targets here consist out of two different or single standalone objects, and what we want to do is we want to bind that watermill wheel to the housing, to basically into the window of that housing. A way to do that is using bone constraints. So in that case, we've added a bone into the center of that wheel here, and I've just linked that object up to that bone. And then we could use vertex constraints. So I'm going to add 2 point helpers here, and I'm going to snap them into position of that house to follow along that housing, just by binding those up, onto different vertices. So the way Black Forest Game Studio works, and I think plenty of game studios out there work with 3ds Max, they are creating their own bunch of scripts, or they are collecting their own bunch of scripts from scriptspot.com. And in that case, Black Forest Games has created their own tool of basic scripts. In that case, all I want to do is I'm going to use the align object part here. What this enables me to do is pick an object which I want to align to another object like this, and then it enables me to choose from a single vertex. So as we've learned earlier, every vertex has its own ID, so that means that I can snap and bind and constrain that point helper to a specific vertex. There we go. So now it follows along the animation of that housing, and we do that for the second point helper, just like that. Let me see which one it is. There we go. So that looks good. Click on commit, and just so you know, this is no magic happening. It's just these little scripts make it a bit more accessible. In fact, what we've added here is a script controller for the position for these point helpers, and these in that script controller it just says please follow along that vertex ID number 34 or 62, whatever we've said earlier. And then we can come in here and use the bone basically, and use a position constraint for that bone to snap between the position of these 2 point helpers. So I'm going to select the bone. Remember, the wheel is bound to this bone. I'm going to hit the X key, searching for all the commands available in 3ds Max, hitting or looking for position constraint in that case, and this snaps the position up to the first point helper. So what's great about the position constraint is that you can add additional or multiple targets to that constraint. And in that case, I've a point helper at the top, a point helper at the bottom of that window, and it snaps the bone in position right in between. So what I need to do finally is simply animate the weight of that position constraint. So I'm starting at 0. As soon as the morph is done at frame 15, I'm going to raise that into up to 100%. I'm going to leave 100% up until frame 50, and in frame 65 back to 0. And this makes the transition not necessarily perfect, but it's absolutely good enough for an object which is supposed to be morphing in the background simultaneously with a dozen of other assets in a matter of seconds, really. So we have the morphing in place now. The one thing that doesn't happen in 3ds Max right now is the transformation of the texture. And as you can see, we have this cute texture for the one look, and we have the dark texture for the second object, for the morph target, really. So an easy way to have this texture transformation going on in the viewport is obviously using different blend materials in the slate material editor. But what also happens here is that we are using different map channels. We're using normal maps, we're using specular maps. It's kind of difficult to set up and have that transferring over into our game engine. So the easiest and most productive way to do that is program and establish our own DirectX shader material. So I'm going to do that right now in the slate material editor. So right, just feeding that back into the multi-sub object material. And as soon as we do double click on the DirectX shader, you will see that in 3ds Max 2015 we now have access to the ShaderFX dialog and the ShaderFX graph, which basically enables us to graphically program our own DirectX shader. I'm just clamping down the number of dynamic lights to 1 for now, and I'm opening up the ShaderFX graph here, which by default gives you a traditional game surface shader, which gives you access to, you know, the standard stuff, diffuse, specular, reflection, normal map, and so on. And you can import, export your own graphs and pass them around between objects and projects, and also save those files or shaders out as HLSL or CGFX shaders to disk. So let's do one thing then. Basically, I would like to create a standard blend material with a shader. So basically, I'm going to add 2 different textures here, and I would like to be able to blend between those 2 textures. So adding another one with a right click. Every node is accessible with a right click. If you press Ctrl D, it's going to duplicate. Ctrl C, Ctrl V, it's going to copy paste. So you can basically move around with these nodes quite easily. And I'm going to add a linear interpolation to blend between those 2 texture values. So here we see we have a float 3 coming out of that texture. So RGB is going to be fed into the linear interpolation. I'm going to blend between these 2 values with a float operator. So basically just with a number. The result is going to be hooked up into, fed back into the diffuse color slot. So that's all for now. If you go back into the slide material editor on the right hand side, you will notice that we don't have access to these texture values. So there are 2 different ways of accessing or loading in textures. One is directly in the ShaderFX dialog, like I do here. I'm just going to open up the cute diffuse texture, just as we see here, and as soon as I go back into the viewport, you will see, okay, it's black right now. That's because it's blended to the second map, and here we have the texture applied. So nothing too fancy. If you want to create a shader which is accessible to others and also for you and to you in the slate material editor, all you have to do is give the texture a name and expose it into the material. Now we have cute diffuse accessible in the slate material editor. I'm going to reorder the user interface here, so it's always at the very top, and I would like to even name the second texture here as a dark diffuse, and also expose that at the very top in the slate material. So now we have both textures available at our fingertips, and we can do that for every value, for every node in the ShaderFX dialog. So we can expose the blend value here. Going to rename that, and there we go. We have it at our fingertips in the material editor. So yeah, ShaderFX can be very technical and can go very deep, but in the end, you only need one guy in the team who's capable of getting his head around that kind of shader programming language, and then he can expose all the important values into the material editor and to make it accessible for you. So as we've seen here, we have this blend value, which should be able to toggle between 0 and 1. And I've just changed or enabled the advanced editing mode for the ShaderFX dialog, which gives me more control and even more operators for our shader creation. Now I was able to cap the minimum and maximum amount for the blend value between 0 and 1. And also I can go into existing nodes like the texture node, and you will see, oh, this goes really deep. It's actually a texture consists out of a group, and in that group we have, you know, the color information, we have the mapping coordinates and so on, and we can create our own groups, can save those to disk and make them usable on other projects again. And then again, it's important to know that ShaderFX has been integrated into Maya LT as well as in Maya 2015. So it's basically the exact same user interface. It's using the exact same shaders here. And I've just imported a shader which has been created by the Black Forest Games guys, which actually is using a specular, normal map and diffuse map, but it's also taking into account the camera position, and based on that camera angle, we're going to create a rim lighting effect without having active or dynamic lights in the scene. And basically all those assets in Giana Sisters have been created by using that kind of a shader. So they always use a room lighting to transfer or to add some sort of diffuse lighting to the assets. And then they use a dynamic light on top to really put the spot on or put the light on some of the objects in the scene. So a good trick or a good way to actually assign those textures to the shader in 3ds Max is basically just by opening up the Windows Explorer and drag and dropping those textures over into the exposed texture node slots in your slate material editor. So for me, that was kind of the most efficient way to assign these textures. Otherwise, I would have needed to click on every slot and assign it manually. So this is way faster. All right, let's add the cute color, which is the cute diffuse, to the diffuse cute over here. And what we have also created or integrated in the shade FX here is that the dark version of those textures is always using a different mapping channel. So it's able to transform between those different map channels in real time. And as you can see here, we have the rim color for the cute version, and we have a different rim color for the dark version. So whenever we transform or do the morphing and have the dark texture applied, we can use a different sort of lighting to that scene dynamically. So, well, hitting animate button, and we can easily go into the blend value mode from 0 to 1, and again shift right click on that slider gives another keyframe for that effect in frame 50, and frame 65 I'm going to hit right click on that slider to fire it back to 0, and now we have the blend value going in, or the blend material or shader going in the 3ds Max viewport. It's very, very fast. So if you compare that with a composite map, for example, which has to be generated for every frame, if you animate that, which is kind of time consuming for 3ds Max to be calculating, these shaders are real time, and they give a very good starting point for your game engine. So it's fair to say that those FX files, which we see here, those are getting generated out of ShadeFX. You don't have to write a single line of code to get exactly this, but this is kind of hardwired into 3ds Max or Autodesk software overall, so it is not necessarily something that you can plug and play into let's say Unity, for example, but it's a good starting point to get you somewhere in your game engine. That's basically what ShadeFX is about. Let's kind of wrap that process up. So we've seen a bit of morphing, we've seen how to apply the shader in the viewport of 3ds Max, and obviously we could render that. So we can use the Quicksilver GPU rendering to access all these DirectX shaders and make or generate previews and turntables out of that. Another great example here is that gnome transforming into that gargoyle, or how we call it in Germany, it's a Gartenzwerg, doing their transformation here. And another favorite of mine, sausages morphing into torture instruments. So a lot of playful and charming objects and assets being created by Black Forest Games here. So that's kind of the chapter for that. Let's have a look at how to model non-organic objects like trees in Mudbox. So as you know, Mudbox is the sculpting and texture painting tool, which is also part of the 3ds Max Entertainment Creation Suite. So basically it enables you an interop workflow between Max, Maya, Softimage and Mudbox in order to export or import your basic 3D assets over into Mudbox, create a more sophisticated sculpt out of that, or even generate a new topology and geometry out of basic assets which you might have generated in 3ds Max. So here we have a tree, a basic tree model. And the beauty about Mudbox really is that it's very, very intuitive to learn. So you at the left-hand corner down here, you have sculpting and paint tools. Then you can combine these tools with a basic stamp. And as soon as you are have selected a sculpt or a pinch, a flatten brush, whatsoever, you can come in here on the right-hand side and decide if you want to mirror that, how strong the brush should be. And then you have layers, and this is kind of the key part here. All those layers are or leverage a non-destructive workflow. So you have layer opacity, you can dial in sculpt layers as well as paint layers and group them up. So what I want to do in order to get the sculpting started, and just to give you like an idea of how that could work, I'm going to use a vector displacement brush here, or vector displacement map, in order to carve in some additional details into the bark of the tree. So that's basically what I'm doing here with my Wacom tablet. You can easily create your own stamps, so based on, you know, photography, or based on a 3D normal map or vector displacement map you generated earlier. And I'm just painting on a certain layer. If I want to undo some changes, I have, you know, undo functionality. I can relax my sculpt, which I've just done here, holding down the shift button, which will, you know, just feather that, relax that effect I've sculpted in here. And well, and then for the layer strength, which is kind of powerful, as we see, we have 100% of, well, so to speak, opacity for that sculpt layer. And what only a few know is that you can also inverse that strength amount. So I could come in here, you know, just dial out the sculpt intensity to from 100 to 0, but I could also dial in a -100. So there we go. And 100% isn't really the limit here. I could even scale that up to 1000. So I have a totally exaggerated sculpt going on here. So these are kind of the final details the Black Forest Game Studio did for that tree here. And let's say we generated a lot of new branches and like extrusions out of that topology here. So in order to get that right, in order to do our texture baking and our unwrapping, we need a clean topology. And Mudbox features these retopologizing functions here, where you could even transfer your paint layers over into a p-text layer and generate multiple subdivision layers out of that one process. So in that case, I'm just going to automatically retopologize the whole mesh just as we go. And I'm also going to reduce the overall polygon count greatly or drastically. This will probably let us miss some certain features, some edge loops on that model. In order to circumvent that, we could have drawn some 3D curves on that tree in order to, well, tell Mudbox where certain edge loops should have been created. So in that case, there we go. We have a very, well, I would say a good starting point for our topology. And we could take that further, send that back over into 3ds Max, and add some additional details back in, right? So this is just one workflow, one thing you could do. And again, you could play with the retopology features in Mudbox even a bit more, and the 3D curves on top. So on the left-hand side, I have the high-res model, which I've just imported out of Mudbox before. And here I would like to get rid of that center part of that tree, and I would like to regenerate that based on the high-res topology on the left-hand side. So I'm just quickly lining that up, and I'm going to use the conform tools, which are part of the graphite modeling tools in 3ds Max and have been in there for a while now. And well, I'm going to draw on that high-res surface here, and my goal is to create certain loops around those eyes in order to make them animatable. I'm adding a push modifier on top so I can see what I'm doing here, and, you know, having more of a non-destructive workflow here so I can get rid of the modifier later on. And then I'm going to use some of the, again, of the conform and freeform topology tools here. So in that case, I'm using the topology draw feature, which enables me to basically draw 2D lines or splines on top of the high-res topology. And as soon as I add in cross sections here, it's going to generate faces or polygons for us on top of that high-res area. So there we go. this is basically what we can do with the with the topology feature. We could change the smoothing group here in the modeling tab, and one thing that comes in really handy is that we can tear off certain features of these in these different tabs and make them available throughout the while we are in different modeling tabs here. So let's see, I would like to use the extend feature, which quickly enables me to well, connect between existing edges and even as we saw here, extend edges and reposition certain vertices. So I'm just going to hold shift to extend that edge up here, and if I hold down shift and control, I could even extend a whole edge loop. So this is something we can do. If I can do it up here. So that's basically how that works. It's a very powerful tool set. So all these different tools in here, they have different shortcuts applied. If you hover over those icons, you will be exposed to these different values. So here I can just draw strips on top of that polygon. Let's have another scale for that. So maybe dial that down to 5. There we go. So and even these strips, or stripes, I don't know, they can be extended by holding shift, and you can move on with that. There's a step build feature which you can actually use to draw in vertices and connect between these vertices in order to create new polygons. So I'm just going to click here and holding down shift while dragging over or in between these vertices is going to create our polygons. So again, this is nothing new in 3ds Max 2015. My goal isn't, it's not my goal to actually show all the new features. It's just something Black Forest Game Studios are using quite a lot here, all these graphite modeling and freeform tools in order to manually retopologize their models. So this is just the basic example. What the next step would be is certainly add textures to that model. So in order to do that, we need to do the texture unwrapping. I'm not going through that in detail here, or I'm not going to touch that in that tutorial, but just a tiny tip here. What again Black Forest Games did in order to create the checker map, they have created, or they've been using the procedural checker map inside 3ds Max, and they've created a checker map in the checker map. So here we have, in the dark areas, we have different shades of gray. Here we have different shades of yellowish color, and this combines or sums up to the overall checker pattern. All right, and I'm just going to add another edit poly modifier on top just to show you the idea of how to use the freeform tools, not only the conform brush and so on, but shifting around existing vertices in order to create the dark version of that model. And then we could pass that over into, or send it back over into Mudbox in order to create our texture. So, back in Mudbox, let me quickly unhide the next stage of that model. So here we've already created the texture. So with these texture painting tools, and you have layers for the texture paint, you can export Photoshop layers, you can combine Mudbox texturing and Photoshop texturing in that environment. That's really powerful, and we have a normal map on top of that. That's really neat. And in Mudbox 2015 we now have layer grouping going on, and I'm also able to blend between the dark and the cute version for the model itself. The way this is being handled is if you add a morpher in 3ds Max and you have different morph targets here and send that whole object over into Mudbox, all these morph targets are getting their own sculpt layer, so you can easily blend between those morph targets. I'm just going to create another diffuse texture for that dark version here. I'm quickly adjusting the color, desaturate it a little bit, make it a bit darker, to just generating an overall, well, darker look basically for that version of the tree. And then I'm going to add in additional details. So here we have, well, basic paint tools, 3D paint tools. And this is kind of one of the strengths of Mudbox. We have a lot of users who do you know, sculpting in other packages, and then they come back into Mudbox to add additional detail to the sculpt, as well as using the full 3D environment here in order to project their textures, their imagery onto the 3D object. So as you can see here, we can easily use our image browser to add additional, or use photography and our images in order to paint on top. And what we can also do, we can load in or create layer masks. So I'm loading in a mixture of a cavity and image occlusion map as a layer mask for my green moss I'm painting on top. So as you can see here, I'm not going to do a super clean job. I'm just giving some tips and tricks for that kind of workflow. So this is a way to easily spread additional detail and additional textures on top of your diffuse color slot. All right, just adding some more green here. So finally, we're going to export that back over into 3ds Max. I would like to show you how that texture is being exported and baked down in that process. Before we do that, I'm going to add 2 more subdivisions, and I'm going to add or basically sculpt on another layer. Non-destructive is like the buzzword there. And I'm going to use the pose tools, which have been added with characters in mind, basically. But this is kind of the perfect example where we can also use these pose tools in order to generate object variations. So I'm quickly adding bones or joints into that mesh here. Really just click and dragging in order to get the weighting for these bones or for these joints, going all the way down here. There we go. And just keep in mind, we are generating a morph target here. So when we're using these kind of transformation tools, we're not changing the topology or the vertex count at all. We're just changing the vertex position. So this result of the object we're generating right here should be fully compatible with the 3ds Max morpher in the end, and with the engine's morpher. So there we go. Now we have our posing available, and just by click and dragging we can change the position of these branches. I could even hold down the left mouse button in order to get some additional translation, like scaling up and down, done. So that's really fun and very effective for that kind of, you know, organic modeling here. All right, what's also beautiful is as soon as we get out of the pose tools, you will see that all these informations are or were stored on a specific layer. So it's still a non-destructive workflow, as I said earlier, and we can scale in and or dial in and out these details, these posing details into our object. And I'm going to send that back over into 3ds Max, and it's going to ask us where to store the textures and so on. And well, and back in 3ds Max, I'm going to adjust or pick that tree, that Mudbox tree on the right hand side, over into our morpher, and I'm going to get the Mudbox material. I'm going to do a right click on the baked down diffuse color slot, and I'm going to paste that over into our ShadeFX shader. And there we go, we have the final version of that tree up and running. So there are some additional workflows for that particular scene. We don't have the time to look into that into detail, but I might do an additional video on that. So basically it's about level of detail generation. So Black Forest Games did 3 versions of certain assets, and there's a bit of, you know, a tip and trick going on how to use the skin wrap modifier in order to generate morphable level of detail variations for those trees. And those are like the 3 level of details here. So next step will be to have a look at the character animation, as well as on how to spread and assign these level assets. So as one of the last scenes, we are going to have a look at the character animation and the character rig in 3ds Max. So as we've seen earlier, we have 2 versions of Giana, the punk version and the cute version. And here in 3ds Max we see, well, the dark version, the punk version of the character. I'm going to walk you through a few features of 2015 combined with, stuff that has been around for a while. For example, what we see here is the ability to use the new Scene Explorer in 3ds Max. So having nested layers working is a key advantage of using 2015 here. So let's say we have one layer here for the punk character, and this one layer stores the rig, the bones, the mesh itself, and all those additional layers with controls and helpers. And we can easily drag and drop these layers to nest and unnest them and bind them and group them up into different layers. So this is just to give you a brief overview on that rig here. So we have additional facial animation, facial controls. It's a bit overdone for that kind of game because we never see that character as a real close-up, but at least we have the ability to easily animate different facial expressions and again animate that over time. The overall character has been animated by using the Character Animation Toolkit. So Character Animation Toolkit, as you know or might know, is a mixture of doing procedural animation and animation layering. You can flawlessly, you can easily blend between forward and inverse kinematic system, as we see here with the hand. And this overall gives you a very good control over the character. And bear in mind that you also are able to export that Character Animation Toolkit rig over into Motion Builder, and as we've seen in several other videos, we're able to hook up the Kinect or other motion capture controls and devices in order to generate sophisticated character animation on top of that character rig. So as you see here, we have some bones for the ponytail, the back of the head, and we'd like to animate that. So let me just quickly unhide some layers here, get rid of the rig controls, and just I'd like to give you a general overview on the bone structure of that character. And as you can see here, we have the ponytail again. I would like to animate that by using the Mass Effects dynamic system in 3ds Max. So what I generated out of these bones are basic box meshes. And I already linked that up, so there's a hierarchy chain for that ponytail here. And on top of these boxes, I've applied a Mass Effects rigid body or operator. So if I press play, all these boxes fall to the ground, and this is basically because the Mass Effects system in 3ds Max doesn't recognize or take into account the hierarchy, the parenting of 3ds Max. In order to have this kind of linking, we need to create joints. So here I'm going to create a ball socket constraint. I'm going to link that up between the head and that ponytail, just aligning it once. And I'm going to, again, parent it to the head collision and lock the twisting in order to, make it a bit more stiff. And if I press play, there we go. So the first chain link sticks to the head as we would have wished. So I need to create the same thing for all the other joints. An easy way to do that is opening up the Max Script Listener. And here we have all the commands we just generated by, clicking with the mouse and doing stuff in our user interface. And this enables us to easily automate that stuff. So I've generated a Max script which will automatically create all these ball sockets, line them up and link them to within that hierarchy. And if I press play, we have the animation for the ponytail. There's even a dynamic system applied to that. So we have a wind system going on here. And if I adjust the strength while playing the Mass Effects system, this will automatically adjust the animation for that hair. So, all right, I'm going to bake that down for these 160 frames. So this is just the idle animation of the character, as you can see here. We would have to do that same thing for the walk, for the run cycle, for the jump animation, but we can easily do that. So, all right, we have two options now. So here we have the basic bone system. We can link that up to those boxes, or we could come into these boxes and basically, copy those keyframes, those position and rotation keyframes onto those bones. So what we can do in 3ds Max 2015, again, is switch between the layer manager and the Scene Explorer, and this enables me to oversee the hierarchy. Here we have the ponytail, which I can just drag and drop over onto the Mass Effects boxes in order to re-establish the linking. And if I go back into animation mode of the character animation toolkit system, we see that those bones are now following the Mass Effects boxes. And if I just unhide the mesh, you will see, there we go, we got the ponytail in place. So one minor detail is kind of missing in that solution here, and this is that the idle animation is a loop animation, but the ponytail, the Mass Effects simulation, kind of flips back at frame between frame 0 and frame 160. So an easy way to fix that is save out that animation for these 5 or 4 boxes, I don't even know, 5 boxes, as an animation file, and then we're going to open up the good old motion mixer. So this has been around for a while now, and it's still a great tool to, which enables us to blend between existing animations. So here we have this bone set up for the Mass Effects boxes. It's still using all those keyframes. As soon as we add those effects or those max objects into the motion mixer, the animation is gone. But if we do a right click, we can reload the animation file we just generated back into the motion mixer. And this gives us now full control. So what I want to do now, I would like to trim that clip just a little bit, get rid of the first 20-30 frames in order to have this this initial overshoot of the Mass Effects system, get rid of that. And then I'm going to convert that into a transition track. So just by shift clicking, I'm going to move or duplicate that animation. I'm going to find a good loopable transition for that part of the animation. So now we have our first loop for the animation. My goal is to have a full loopable hair simulation for the full 160 frames. So I'm going to move that down to the first frame. So we have the start of the animation of the transition starts at frame 0, and I'm going to optimize or find another looping for the mid here. So I have to do that twice. Let's say I'm going to search for the first 20 frames up front, move that back here. So now we should have the exact same frame at 160 as well as in frame 0, which gives us as the end result a perfectly looped animation. Okay, I'm going to bake that down to my mesh objects here. So I'm just removing the 3ds Max objects, and this is going to generate the keyframes once more. And as soon as we hit play, because the bones are still linked up to the box system here, to the Mass Effects bones or boxes, the hair, the ponytail is looped up perfectly. You could take that very, very far. So what you also can do with the Mass Effects system is use the M-cloth system. This is something I've done for the rest of the hair. So I just bounce some vertices to the mid of the head and hit simulate. I point cache that, and we're good to go. So that's kind of the character animation part. Let's finally hop over into our game engine and have a look at how to get all these level assets into place. As we've seen how to generate basic morph assets, how to generate the shade FX shader, and we've seen a bit of sculpting and texturing in Mudbox as well as the character animation part, we are now ready to hop over into our game engine and place all these level assets into our game and make up the final runtime. So we're not going deep into the game engine at all, but just for presentation purpose, I've been using the Unity game engine here. Black Forest Games, they've actually used the Vision engine to create Giana Sisters, but this workflow is very transferable and can be used in basically every game engine out there. So yeah, what the process looks like is basically that we have all these different landscape tiles, and we're able to instantiate or duplicate those prefabs here and quickly use the vertex snap in the Unity game engine to sketch up the whole level or a level of the game. And then finally we're going to use 3ds Max and the placement tools in 3ds Max to dress up the scene with additional details like the dwarf, the gnome we've seen, or the what else have we seen, the windmill, watermill thing, and so on. So additional detail comes into play as soon as we swap that level back into 3ds Max. So the way that we do that, basically, or why would you even want to start building up your level in the game engine? This is basically quite often the case when there are game mechanics applied to different objects in the game engine, like this. So in that case, all these platforms should be, have some sort of game mechanics applied, so to speak, but the environment objects in the background, they won't have game mechanics. All right, so we can use the 3ds Max, the object placement in 3ds Max right away. The only thing we have to bear in mind, we need to export the position of these level prefabs over into 3ds Max. There is no proper export for Unity, so what I've done is I wrote a basic file export as an XML. So this is basically just writing down the position, rotation and scale information for every landscape tile we just generated in that scene. And just to give you a look here under resources, I've already imported the other level assets from out of 3ds Max. So here I have, some trees, bushes, the gnome is here, the Gartenzwerg, remember, and we're able to position that in 3ds Max now. So back in 3ds Max 2015, I'm able to import that XML file. And there's a great addition in 2015, because now we're not only able to run Max script, but we're also able to start Python scripts out of a Max script. And Python, well, this is basically super powerful now, because it comes with all these runtime libraries, frameworks, whatsoever. So in that case, we don't have to write our own XML parser at all. So we're able to use a standard Python library and build up our own Python import and export process here. So this has been hooked up into the Black Forest games here and those tools, and basically the XML file just delivered the position and rotation data out of Unity, and now we can use let's say the new object and placement tool out of 3ds Max, and just by holding down Shift, I'm going to duplicate that tree and place it on top of the existing level scene, just like that. So it's a great, well, basically what it says, it's a great placement tool in 3ds Max right away. Very, very intuitive to handle. It's different to the object pane, which we'll see in a second. Very intuitive to handle. You have different up axes, and you can decide whether to use the pivot point or the center or the actual bounding box for these objects. And we're going to get that Gartenzwerg in place. That's nice. And let me see if I can get the teapot over. There we go. Finally, some teapots in 3ds Max. There we go. And we have the morph animation, the bend animation, and well, overall animation in place on all these objects. Another great method to place our objects, as you are probably aware of, is the object paint tool. So this is also in the ribbon on the right hand side. So basically all you need to do is add these objects into a group, into my paint group, and then I can use all these 3 bushes and paint with them in random order on the scene, basically. And these brushes, as soon as I start painting, they are still live, so I can adjust the spacing, the rotation and the scaling for all these different objects. So let's see if I can get that right. Just, I'm not going to win any prizes with that. It's just to give you an idea of how to use the object space, object painting and the object placing here in 3ds Max, and export that back over into the game engine. So let's get some more trees up and running. So again, what I already did in the background, like preparation for that tutorial here, I've exported all the informations, all the geometry via FBX over into the Unity game engine. So now I've selected the newly placed level assets. I'm going to export an XML file with the position and rotation of these objects. Back in Unity, I can use the XML import, which I wrote as part of the import export process here, and it gives me it instantiates all these prefabs, the tree, the teapot, the gnome, and places them on top of my level. So this is a great interaction between Game Engine and the 3ds Max placement tools by using the Python library as well as just basic XML import export processes. Great, so this basically concludes this Meet the Expert series, where we've learned about how Black Forest Games created the 3D content for their game Giana Sisters. So this is a brief summary. As I mentioned earlier, there's a great perspective guide tutorial for Sketchbook Pro 2015 by Scott Robertson. So great guy, go on YouTube, search for Scott Robertson, he has plenty of stuff on there. And a big thank you goes out to Andreas Feist by Black Forest Games, who took the time to actually polish up all those assets, give us insight into their production pipeline, and made this Meet the Expert series possible. Also remember that all the 2015 software we've seen, like Sketchbook, 3ds Max, Mudbox, is available as a free trial on Autodesk.com. And if you want to stay in touch, just drop by on Facebook and add me in there, or follow on Twitter. And I would love to, hear about your comments and questions. Just let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for your time. Take care, and good luck with your projects.